Considered by most to be a horrible yet important episode of Season 1, the Neutral Zone would reintroduce an old enemy while simultaneously laying the framework for a new one. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information on any given topic in Star Trek. In this episode, we're taking a look at Star Trek The Next Generation's episode The Neutral Zone, to better understand its place in Star Trek history. I've never personally been a fan of this episode. I find it boring and a little ridiculous, to be honest. But like most, I do see its importance and hence have decided to include it at this time before presenting the third and final part of my Star Trek The Next Generation Season 1 historical overview. So let's dive right in. The Neutral Zone was a story written by Deborah McIntyre and Mona Cree. Deborah, as far as I can tell, would only co-write this episode for Star Trek, and has one other credit to her name, being a writing credit for the 1999 video game MechWarrior 3. Mona Cree, similarly, would have only this writing credit to her writing career. Maurice Hurley then took the story by these unknown writers and would turn it into the episode we're reviewing here. Maurice Hurley originally envisioned the Neutral Zone to be part of a trilogy that would continue in the second season. It would see the Borg formally introduced and an alliance would be formed between the United Federation of Planets and the Romulan Star Empire to counter this new threat. Writing on this episode was abruptly halted, however, when in 1988 the Writers Guild of America went on strike, which meant that although the script was only in its first draft status, no more work could be completed on it, and I think it shows. Unlike the other bad episodes of Season 1, this episode in particular lacks the tightness that most of those others did indeed have. This episode is certainly lifted by the musical score of Ron Jones. As usual, his musical cues play a huge part in turning this episode from a horrible disaster into a somewhat passable outing for TNG. As previously stated, the Neutral Zone was intended to reintroduce the Romulans back into the Star Trek mix, while simultaneously dropping hints about a brand new, all-powerful foe, the Borg, that would then continue to be revealed in Season 2 of the series. Though this new foe would be part of a 3-part story arc beginning with the Neutral Zone, the original intent for this idea began back in the episode Coming of Age, where Admiral Quinn comes aboard the Enterprise bringing Remick to interrogate Picard, so Quinn could then confide in Picard that there was something strange happening at Starfleet Command. This plot thread would then lead to the episode Conspiracy, where Picard thwarted an enemy plot by the Bluegill parasites and Starfleet Command was set right. We were then to have found out in the 3-part story arc that these Bluegills were what the then unnamed Borg used to assimilate and control people. Hurley, who had created this new foe, had intended the Borg to be an insectoid species. However, this would be axed due to budgetary constraints of the show. And so the Borg would lose their connection to the episodes Coming of Age and Conspiracy, leaving one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in all of Star Trek. However, the Neutral Zone would then be connected by the scooped off the face of the planet reference, which would then be continued in both TNG episodes Q Who and The Best of Both Worlds Part 1. Also, the Borg had been intended to replace the Ferengi as the big baddie for the series, as Gene Roddenberry's species creation wasn't well received at the time, most fans seeing the Ferengi as a joke rather than a real threat. Mark Alamo would appear as the Romulan commander in this episode. Most people would come to recognize him for his excellent work in portraying Gul Dukat throughout Star Trek Deep Space Nine's run, though this episode actually marked his second appearance in Star Trek, the first being an Antikin named Bedar in the episode Lonely Among Us. Anthony James, an actor, author, and painter, would play the sub-commander in the seat next to Alamo. Because of his bone structure, he would often be hired on to play the role of henchman throughout his acting career, but his first feature film role was in the 1967 classic film In the Heat of the Night. Unfortunately, he passed away of cancer on May 26, 2020. He was 77 years of age. A little bit of Trek trivia for you here. The scanted Science Division ensign who left the turbolift was actually played by Gene Roddenberry's assistant, Susan Sackett. Sackett wearing Marina Sirtis's uniform from the pilot episode Encounter at Farpoint. And the face of Thomas Raymond that Troy finds for Claire was actually that of associate producer of TNG, Peter Lorriston. Peter Mark Richmond would play Ralph Offenhouse, one of the freeze-dried humans in this episode, while Gracie Harrison and Leon Rippey would play Claire Raymond and Sonny L.Q. Clemens, respectively. Richmond was no stranger to science fiction, appearing in 2 episodes of The Outer Limits, and he appeared in more than 100 television roles as a guest star, and I think he delivers a solid performance with what he's given here to work with. Gracie Harrison, on the other hand, was far less experienced in television, but also plays her role quite solidly. She also appeared on the television show Hill Street Blues, as well as the sitcom Family Ties. And last but not least, Leon was also no stranger to acting, appearing in mostly films rather than television over his long career, films such as The Patriot, Firestarter, and Maximum Overdrive. Again, he too gave a solid performance. This episode caused a few stirs in the fanbase community for 2 specific reasons. The first being Riker's line,
"It's just a piece of space debris. If we hadn't been sitting here waiting for the captain, we wouldn't have noticed it. Let it be. Let nature take its course."
which contradicted the exploratory nature of the Enterprise's mission, which the audience had been beaten over the head with throughout all of the first season. And second, Picard's line,
"But Data, they were already dead. I mean, what more could have happened to them?"
Picard contradicting himself, as apparently they were not dead, and expressing a willingness to have left them, without even trying to revive them, again going against what the season had been beating into its audience's head all throughout its run. Another bit of Trek trivia for you all is, if you look hard enough through the scenes in Claire's quarters, you'll see not only a Constitution-class Easter egg, but also the names on Claire's desktop are actually a list of the first 6 actors who starred as the Doctor in Doctor Who. You'll also be able to spot Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy's names in the list, though in the remastered versions, these names have been replaced by people's names who had been involved with the series. The Diderotix-class Warbird would also be introduced for this episode. The massive Romulan counterpart to the Galaxy class was the last starship designed by model designer extraordinaire Andrew Probert, who had this to say on his design process for the starship. The Romulan Warbird from the original series had a bird design on it, and I wanted to stay with that in some way. So I started with bird and bird wing shapes, and eventually came to a design similar to what is seen on screen. But my concept was to have one engine above and one engine below, because I felt that having a vertical design would make it appear more alien in front of the Enterprise. 2 Diderotix physical models were built. One had a clear green hull, while the other had a more gray-green appearance, and the addition of more window lights as well as additional features on the outer sides of the Warbird's warp engines. Time for more Trek trivia. You know the Mazarite ship seen in Star Trek Enterprise's first season episode Fallen Hero? Well, that was actually a kit bash from the Diderotix-class Warbird. Did you know that the cryogenic capsule seen in the neutral zone was actually named the SS Birdseye? I know I didn't. Also, this episode would be the first episode to mention the show's actual year, that being 2364. And this reference would then be used to calculate all future and past historical chronologies for the franchise's lifetime. All in all, though adding a great deal to the Star Trek universe, this episode was just a boring mess that oftentimes made our human heroes appear ridiculous and downright arrogant. This story would make clear that Maurice Hurley did in fact have no experience at the time writing for a science fiction show, and will remain a testament to great ideas poorly executed.
On the next episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Commander,
Look at this.
The crew discovers frozen survivors from the 20th century.
What's going to happen to us?
In the middle of a perilous mission to confront arch-enemies.
You think that we attacked your outposts?
Could this feared encounter spark an explosive battle?
I recommend we go immediately to battle stations.
Find out on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrack. What do you think of the Neutral Zone? Do you wish they would have stayed with the insectoid species rather than the cyborg enemy we eventually got? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel not fall asleep while watching the Neutral Zone? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper. Okay, so why exactly is the Enterprise hanging out in space while Picard shuttles over to the starbase? I mean, we know from when Picard returns that speed is of the essence.
Enterprise, this is the captain. Number 1, I want to get underway as soon as the shuttle is secure.
Aye, sir. We will make all preparations.
So why didn't the Enterprise herself merely go to the starbase in the first place? Or, once Picard found out the nature of the emergency, why didn't he have the Enterprise warp to the starbase and get him? So here's one of those "we did it for the plot" moments. When Riker is explaining 24th century tech to the cryo people, Picard pages him.
Number 1.
Riker gets up and strolls over and uses a button above the replicator to respond to Picard. Huh? When has anyone ever used a button to respond to a page? Don't they always simply tap their comm badge to reply? Of course, if he hadn't have done that, Offenhouse wouldn't know how to use the comm panel later on in the episode to annoy Picard. Speaking of the comm panel annoy Picard scene, later on when Picard goes to see Offenhouse to spank him for using them, he lies to Offenhouse.
Those comm panels are for official ship business.
Since when has that been true? We see all throughout the series that communications are for anyone to use, no matter the reason, aboard the ship.
Dr. Crusher to Ensign Crusher. Aren't you supposed to be getting a haircut, Wesley?
When Offenhouse strolls onto the bridge, Riker orders him removed by security at once.
Get that man off the bridge, now!
I'm not going anywhere.
Security officers grab him, but then leave him on the bridge during the entire exchange with the Romulans. Is this appropriate Starfleet officer behavior?